Hi, we're Chelsea and Tony, and you're watching our photography podcast, Picture This. And today's topic is what makes a great photographer?
You can watch us on YouTube or you can listen to our podcast. Just search for Picture This on whatever podcasting app that you use. It's an audio-only format, though, so it's nice to take with you as you're working out or something, driving.
And this episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to create a beautiful website, blog, portfolio, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features an elegant interface, beautiful templates, and incredible 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/Tony and use the coupon code PORTFOLIO to get 10% off at checkout.
Yeah, Squarespace makes your pictures look great, and they make all this possible.
Yes, thank you for sponsoring the show, Squarespace. So,
Today,
what makes a great photographer?
yeah, this is a hard question to answer.
It's
because
really hard.
It's different for different types of photography.
Possibly.
Yeah, and I don't think the answer is at all obvious.
It's not easy.
We have some experience with this because, for one, we've been doing these podcasts where we kind of like really deeply explore the lives of different great photographers.
And the history of great photography.
Right. So we've gotten into like the childhood of great photographers and kind of seen what makes them up as people. But also we're photography educators.
Right.
We have photography books. And so we, more than other authors, we work closely with photographers from their very first camera all the way through them becoming like well-published photographers.
Yes, we've seen a lot of people start.
Or failing completely and
Yes.
giving up. So we do kind of see what traits make up the most successful and the least successful photographers.
So I have some opinions that you probably will share with me because we've seen so many begin photography and then become pro or maybe just fade away. But also we studied the history and some great photographers to see, kind of dig in and maybe see what universally makes a great photographer. But one of the first things I did is I went to Twitter and I asked our followers what they think makes a great photographer. Now, I put in a few suggestions: creativity, technical chops, innovation, storytelling ability. And people seemed to think that creativity was the most important element. A lot of people commented and said, hey, I think it's a combination. Some people had their own ideas, maybe some business savvy or passion or persistence, all really good suggestions. But
followed closely by storytelling ability.
Yeah, storytelling ability was a very close second. So I was surprised by that, especially because our YouTube channel, we educate people. We make a lot of videos about photography, and they come with a lot of metrics. And the biggest trend that we see is that our technical videos are the most popular. So
yeah, really I went through our 20 most popular videos, and 9 out of those 20 were focused on photography technique, but in a very like literal way. Like, this is how you take photos of
These
star
are our
trails.
top 20?
Yep. And then 11 out of those 20 were focused on gear. Like, either should you buy this camera, or how do you use this specific camera? Like, which buttons do you push? So far, these are all like, all
technical.
20 were pretty technical
Not
videos.
really dealing with creativity or storytelling.
We do have videos that cover creativity and storytelling, but none of them are among our more popular videos. And if you look at other YouTubers, all the top channels are
Mostly technical.
mostly technical stuff.
So that could be one of two things. It could be that people are supplementing their creativity with the technical aspect. Maybe they feel like creativity is something you can't learn, and so they're looking up the technical parts of photography. Or maybe people feel like the technical and gear part, there's some instant gratification there. You can go out right away. You can click 2 buttons and you can buy a brand new camera. But you can't really quickly attain creativity. That's something that you have to work on long term.
But here's something else to support this idea. If you take a picture that people really like, what are the questions that people ask you about it?
Which lens did you use? Which camera did you use?
And then,
what's your shutter speed?
Right. What gear? What camera settings?
Which aperture?
But if you have a great picture of a great portrait, nobody says, how did you make contact with the model? What did you do to get that expression out of her? Where did you get that dress even? No.
How did you think of that composition? Yeah.
Right. What was your inspiration? What artists do you look up to? No,
So
it's Gear.
But that was part of the reason that we wanted to make this podcast, because we get so many gear questions.
Right. You're asking the wrong questions.
Well, no, I think that the technical aspect is important.
It is.
But I think it's unbalanced.
Right.
And with this podcast, one thing we wanted to do was bring some historical context to your photos, but also talk a little bit about creativity. So we were kind of throwing this question around. What makes a great photographer? We asked Justin, Siobhan, some photography friends, and they had some really interesting ideas. Someone said, what kind of photographer are we talking about? A photojournalist and a wedding photographer might have a completely different skill set.
They certainly do.
So here we have a photojournalist, and we were thinking...
And can I just say, I could never be even a good photojournalist.
No?
My personality makeup doesn't have all of these things. Like, I have no compassion. That's the first thing you listen.
What?
I'm just joking. I have compassion.
Yes, you do.
But perhaps I'm not nearly good enough at connecting to people and reach. I'm a little bit introverted.
Yeah.
And I think a good photojournalist can go in there and really connect closely with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I lack.
Yeah.
So what other traits did you think were important for a photojournalist?
Well, I was studying a lot of great photojournalists. One, Mary Ellen Mark.
Right.
And,
amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she has this way of connecting to her subjects. And she has a self-awareness of herself, but she has a self-awareness of society as a whole. So she would go in and she would take pictures of child prostitutes in India, circus people, poor people, all the things that are traditionally kind of difficult to look at. And instead of judging them from the outside, she would spend months with them and become a part of their life and have compassion for them, and even sometimes offered them a place to live. And by becoming a part of their lives and not just standing on the outside and doing that kind of poverty porn thing that you see where you're like, oh, a poor brown person. It's very like almost like voyeuristic. She would become a part of their lives. And that way she could really document their life because she understood it. So there was one step beyond just seeing. There's understanding and there's compassion.
And I'll also say that we'll see this as we look at all these examples, but photography is secondary to all the great photographers. And that's definitely true with Mary Ellen. Like when you think of Mary Ellen, you don't think of the photos so much. That was a tool to accomplish a goal. The main message was her connection to the people. She had a bigger goal in mind than simply taking pictures or using cameras.
Yeah, she did.
Did you have other photojournalist examples?
I think that those traits really encompass a lot of famous photojournalists that we've researched.
So I might say maybe it doesn't make a great photojournalist. Maybe it just makes eating a photojournalist who can feed himself. But that's very much a working job. Like they need to hit deadlines and get there on time and just get the shot. So I think things like consistency and the ability to deliver under pressure, maybe that just defines what a good or mediocre photojournalist is, as opposed to one who fails completely.
Some of them know how to fudge the truth a little bit too, because we looked at Dorothea Lange. Yeah, they kind of have a flair for the drama, or they see a situation that kind of sums up a problem, even though it may be it's not related. So like you think of like the Dust Bowl photos, and she made up this story about how these migrant workers were starving or something, but really they were just waiting for somebody to come pick them up. I don't know, but sometimes the story can be different. Or the famous shot with the buzzard. I can't remember the photographer's name now. It looked like a starving child was about to be eaten by a buzzard, but really his mom was like right there and they were bringing food to them. So sometimes they can kind of see a scene that looks like something that it's not. Sounds like cheating, but it also may be a storytelling skill. Yeah.
So what about portrait photographers? What do you think the most important trait for a portrait photographer?
I mean, they're all of the great traits of any photographer, right? They just have a flair for composition. They have an artistic eye. But I see a lot of great portrait photographers are also so good at connecting to their subjects in some way. They don't even have to be a likable person, but sometimes they are just great at pulling a look out of someone or a feeling. It was Avedon who said, "My portraits are more about me than the people in them." So he was able to have an idea and then project it upon a person and have them emote it. And I think that says a lot about how he works with people if he could make a picture of someone else more about him.
Yeah, if you look at, say, if you contrast commercial photographers with portrait photographers, commercial photographers tend to work with models, whereas portrait photographers work with non-models.
Yeah.
And with non-models, the single hardest thing is getting them to be comfortable in front of the camera. And to be able to go a step beyond just getting them comfortable and get them to actually express themselves is a rare trait. And the best portrait photographers can do that. And you hear about them spending hours and hours with a person just in their house, just getting to know them and establishing a long-term connection. And a lot of people who have been the subject of famous portrait photographers will feel like they have like a lifelong relationship with this person, even afterwards. Yeah. You know what I mean? They really connect deeply and they bring that out of the person. I think that's probably what really separates the working portrait photographers from like the great portrait photographers. And you wrote down an understanding of beauty. And I think in a very like almost mechanical way, can be really important to understand that we, maybe we like higher cheekbones. Maybe in a female figure, we like to see a narrower waist and wider hips, because you can hide that or accentuate that using lighting and a person's pose.
Well, I was also thinking an understanding of beauty because I see a lot of amateurs bring in blonde hair, blue eye, unoffensive face.
Mm-hmm.
It's boring. I mean, in person, it's like, oh, you're so beautiful. But in a picture, I see a lot of great portrait photographers understand something a little strange is beautiful. Freckles or overly sharp cheekbones or strange proportions with an otherwise beautiful face. It's about finding beauty in the uncommon and then finding a way to convey that in front of the camera. And that's important. It has to be eye-catching and different while still being beautiful to the typical person.
Mm-hmm. And clearly an understanding of light is really key, because the difference between hard light and soft light in a portrait, they each have their uses, as does all sorts of natural light. But to be able to see the light and find the light, especially in natural environments, is a skill that can take decades to really master, as well as kind of modifying the light that's already there.
Yeah, and of course, there's so much more we can add to all of these, and I'd really love to hear your ideas in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening, of course, you're welcome to come to YouTube and comment or write to us or tweet to us or whatever, but I think so much can be said about all of these individual categories of what great skills contribute to making a great photographer, portrait photographer, landscape, whatever.
Yeah, and your last item here is boldness. I think that is really important for a portrait photographer, because we see so many portraits. And when you see too many, it becomes cliche. We all know like the old cliche portraits with the hand under the chin. And to be able to take risks and not just repeat the same patterns that you've seen over and over again is something that really makes an eye-catching portrait. Let's take a moment and talk about our sponsor, Squarespace.
Yes, Squarespace makes this show happen. Thank you, Squarespace. If you want a beautiful website, blog, or portfolio, or an online store to sell your photography prints, you can go to squarespace.com/Tony and use the coupon code portfolio to get 10% off. Squarespace does make this show happen, but we personally like them. We both use them. They're the best web hosting that we have tried. And you can give them a shot for 14 days, no credit card needed, no obligation. Try it out, see if you like it. If you do, like I said, you can get 10% off with the coupon code portfolio. It's as easy as that.
Yeah, and they're our sponsor, but I actually think that, all the photographers we think of as great photographers, we've seen their pictures, right? You could be a great photographer and just keep your pictures on your computer or in your filing cabinet as negatives.
Or on your Facebook wall, and it goes by forever after a few people like it.
Right. So all of these people have found a way to present their photos in a way that the outside world can see and appreciate them. And you're right. Instagram and Facebook, 500 pics, whatever. These are not great ways to do that. These are social networks. But they're not good ways to show your best art. A portfolio is the right place to do that. In the olden days, that was on paper. And in the modern world, we were lucky enough that we can share our portfolio with the world instantly. So Squarespace is just an awesome place to do it. But just try it out. Make your pictures look awesome, because you don't need a credit card even for the trial.
Yep.
Squarespace.com/Tony. Coupon code portfolio for 10% off. Let's talk about what makes a great wildlife photographer.
Obsession. It's not on there, but the ones that I've known get obsessed by their subject.
Yeah.
They go out there day after day after day. They have the patience, the constitution. They know about what they're shooting, whether it be a bird or a lizard or whatever. And they want to know more about the animal so that they have an opportunity to photograph it.
And wildlife photographer was the only category where I wrote down having gear as being an important trait, because you can get great wildlife photos with mediocre gear, but I really think it makes a difference in wildlife photography.
Oh, definitely.
And to have, that $12,000 lens and that expensive body that you might need to get, or that can definitely make getting those pro pictures easier and better, that requires some finances. So it's almost like this cycle. Like you have to find a way to make money to get this expensive gear in order to get the good picture.
Or you have to be creative with your gear. You see people that set up cameras underwater, so when something dives, they're there. So the gear can be very important with wildlife photography.
Yeah, and some of the most famous wildlife photographers that we've seen were famous because they innovated. They made some technical leap, like National Geographic's first photos. I just lost his name.
The night photos taken with the flash.
Right. I apologize for forgetting the photographer's name.
We'll just write it. We can put it right in.
And he took night photos of wildlife. And this required a lot of innovation, but also a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance, and going out at night and getting pictures of, a cougar drinking at the side of a river was amazing. And expensive too.
Yeah.
So he really innovated, and we do see that now. We see pictures of people who use aquariums in water or find some new technique to get closer to the animals. Pretty amazing stuff. I also find that the best wildlife photographers have a solid background in biology. Many of them studied as biologists and might even have a degree in biology, because you have to get close to the animals. It's not even just a matter of finding a good spot and hanging out there, but the best ones will entrench themselves with a family of meerkats or chimpanzees and stay there for 6 months. And to do that, you have to master the behavior so you don't upset the animals. You also have to have an appreciation for the animals, because otherwise hanging out with meerkats for 6 months would be torture.
No way.
If you love meerkats,
I bet they're a great time. No, but you're absolutely right. You have to put in the time with wildlife photography, because I know from my experience with wildlife photography for a while, every picture you take is better than the last one. You get a little bit closer, or the bird picks up a fish, or you get them hitting the water. And then after that, it's like, I want to see them like mating or feeding their young or fighting in midair, or, it's just, the greatest shot is the rarest moment. And that's what you're waiting for.
As a wildlife photographer, you have a lot of bad days where you go out and
There's
you got to get the whole day and you get nothing.
Yeah.
So you have to love that anyway. You have to love just being out there. And that's one of the things that makes a great wildlife photographer. What about a great landscape photographer, Chelsea?
I think that it's similar to wildlife, where you have to like being out in the wild. You have to put in the time. You have to know the right locations. You have to go there during the right time over and over again. You can go at the golden hour once, but the next day maybe you can get mist in the morning, or geese flying by over the mountains. So it's about putting in the time and getting so many pictures of the same spot until something wonderful happens.
Yeah. You cannot show up at Yosemite and get an Ansel Adams picture.
But at the same time, you have to have that technical skill. You have to understand the technical aspects, because you have to nail it every single time and then hope something happens to make it better, or have an understanding of technically how to improve on a moment, make it even better than it already is.
Yeah, if you're photographing Half Dome, the picture that you put in your portfolio is going to be probably the best moment over the course of 5 years.
Yeah.
When the weather and the sun and the snow and everything align perfectly.
Right.
And you can't screw it up.
Right.
You don't want to have camera shake.
No, you don't
after you wait 5 years to get that perfect moment.
I know. If you're not a great landscape photographer, you could show up at Half Dome on the perfect day with the perfect light, with a beautiful mist, with a deer standing on top or some kind of miracle, and then, I don't know which settings to use, or shutter speed was too long, or
landscape photography is one of those hurry up and wait situations. You can wait hours, months, years, whatever. But then the light is fleeting. It can be gone in a matter of seconds. Seconds for the sun to pass behind a cloud and completely change your light. And you can literally screw up a shot and go back and review it and realize you need to change a setting, and then the moment's gone. You don't get that chance.
Forever.
It will be forever.
I know that can be kind of maddening, but that's why you understand your gear and you understand your composition, and then you hope a moment happens to you.
Yeah, you have to be completely ready.
And then you have to be ready, because sometimes something amazing happens and I'm just like, I'm just like in disbelief. I forget to pick up my camera. That has to be your first reaction. Mm-hmm. That amazes me with some photojournalists. Like, people are getting shot and they're taking pictures. Whew, I'd be out of there. You know me, I'd be running so fast. You have to hunker down and want that more than your life.
Yeah.
And these people die doing this, to really want your picture more than anything else.
And all landscape photographers that have really dug into kind of grew up in a beautiful landscapey place. And Ansel Adams, growing up, well, he grew up outside of Yosemite, but he actually in his adult life lived inside of Yosemite. Yeah. He just happened to fall for a gal who lived in Yosemite, and he moved in with her. But this seems to be the case with just about every landscape photographer. You don't see any of them coming from, central Oklahoma.
Yeah. He was like a gold digger, but he was a scenic digger. He was like, oh, you live in a very beautiful national park?
You just called Ansel Adams a gold digger.
It hasn't been done, but here it is, folks.
What about fine art?
Oh, well, we were really going through every category.
Well, I do think it's something very distinct and different. These are photos that would be displayed and probably sold in galleries.
You know what I noticed about the fine art crowd? They start academic usually.
Right.
And they start making connections with professors who know people with galleries, who know people who shot with this person, who have a developing lab. And it's like, you have to be good at networking, and you have to also appreciate, I don't really know, like the old worldliness of it. You have to kind of succumb to the business of it, which is just respecting the academia and the history and the tradition. And it can be very different than, we see a lot of photographers coming up now from the internet. And it's like, I photoshopped in a bird swooping down, picking up a snake on a child blowing bubbles. And people are like, like, you just won 500 PX. And like the academic world, the fine art world is like, no, we don't.
Yeah,
we won't do that.
Your gallery curator isn't going to be impressed by
it's a very
the number
different
of likes
thing.
that you get.
Yeah.
And in fact, fine art is largely about the personality of the photographer.
David LaChapelle, for example, we talked about him in one of our past podcasts. He just met the right people. He ended up meeting Andy Warhol somehow. He was working in like Studio 54?
Right.
Yeah. And Andy Warhol just gave him a job shooting for a magazine. That was some real right time, right place stuff. He also had photos that looked very fine art. But it can be about just meeting the right people and kind of fitting into that crowd, having your work fit in. And also being very talented. I'm not trying to diminish the fine art world. I have a lot of respect for it, but it's very different.
But there's this thing that our more like left brain audience might not get. And if you were to see a photo on the wall, a typical art buyer needs to know about the artist too. Yeah. They don't just buy the photo. Well, because who is it by? What is their background? Is it a name that they know? Is it somebody who might be important, who might become more important? And David LaChapelle definitely has that. He worked with Andy Warhol. He was his images have revolutionized things. So his images now are worth more because of who he is
and who he's worked with.
It's this circular thing,
and also his talent. But yeah,
his images stand alone.
Yeah, you can be
no
very.
doubt.
But I think what we're saying is you can also be very talented. You could be one of the best in the world, and nobody cares. And you've seen that with a lot of painters, right? They create beautiful art and nobody cares about them until they're dead because they haven't been put in context with the art world yet. Sometimes it takes some hindsight.
Yeah, so if you want to do it while you're alive, you also have to establish yourself as a personality.
I wanted to show some famous artists and kind of dissect their work.
Okay.
So Mary Ellen Mark is the photojournalist, kind of street photographer that I was talking about. She went on the streets and researched the same kids every day. She even made a documentary about it. But a lot of them were prostituting themselves and doing drugs. It was really uncomfortable. I don't know if it's something I could be around, something people don't even really like to talk about. But she got to know these kids. On top of getting to know them, you can see in this picture the awareness that she has of the situation. You have this girl that lives in the street, but she's still holding a doll. There's like this experience and this knowing of things that a child shouldn't know, but they still have these childlike urges. And is she smoking a spliff? Like, what is going on? Is she smoking?
Yeah, she's
Or does she
smoking
have
something.
candy? I don't know. But you can see that she also captures the graffiti on the wall, and it's gritty. Of course, the composition is excellent. Look at that leading line. So you can't just capture something that you think is important. To make it art, you also have to understand composition. It's obviously composed properly. Her eyes aren't perfectly sharp, but that's not the most important thing.
Right.
And it's a beautiful image, but it's also a very powerful and important image.
Yeah, but like you said, there's more story behind it. It wasn't somebody walking past who snapped the photo. This is not classic street photography. She knew the individual, and that's why they were comfortable with her.
And I'll also say she went to college. She got her master's degree in photojournalism. She worked for newspapers first. She traveled abroad as a student, and she went to Turkey, and that's what kind of sparked her passion for documenting. And she did a photo series on what she saw in Turkey and in Europe. And so she was already in this fine art world like we were talking about, and she already had an idea of the history behind fine art and photojournalism. And so she put her work in context, which I think is very important. I think it's important that you learn this education and put your photography in context. What could make your work great? What could make you a great photographer? You don't stand alone in this world. You're up against every photographer that ever was. So you really have to understand everyone around you and the world around you to be a good photographer. It's not just about you. It's not just about the pictures.
Yeah. And if you've owned your D810 for 2 years, you're not going to be a great photographer regardless of who you are or what your talent is, because these things take decades.
Yeah.
It is a lifelong career to produce, 10 to 15 images that people remember.
Researching this podcast actually really changed my idea of photography, because when you're an educator like we are, and you're also on social media like we are, we're not in the fine art world, it becomes a lot about likes. It becomes about shares. It becomes about sensationalizing an event. It becomes about comping and Photoshop skills and people buying workshops. And, it becomes very abstract. We're kind of losing ourselves a little bit as photographers. I think we forget to stand back and not just look at the most like-worthy photo. Which photos are important and genuine and classic and powerful. And I think that that's something that gets lost on the internet a bit. So it's very valuable to kind of step back and study the history and what actually makes a powerful picture that stands the test of time.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And then Richard Avedon was a very famous, what would you call it, portraitist?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at this picture. It's a very famous picture of Marilyn Monroe. And what people say is really powerful about this picture is that we're accustomed to seeing very smiley posed pictures of Marilyn. And he saw something special in this photo. And so I was thinking, wow, it's not just about taking a great picture. It's about understanding which of your pictures is a great picture and why. So I'm sure he had 100 photos of her smiling and posing and flipping her skirt. But he saw this one moment that he captured in between shots of her looking human.
Yeah, it's a candid shot. She's not looking at the camera. She's looking off camera. Her face is relaxed.
But it only works because it's Marilyn Monroe. If it were me, nobody cares about me. They're like, we see her looking relaxed all the time. We wish we could get her to pose and look nice. No, this is Marilyn Monroe. You're used to seeing her perfection. She is the woman every woman wants to be. She's the woman every man wants to be with. She is an icon. And so he caught her in this moment where she looks very human. And that makes it important. And so you have to know what makes your photo important and why. And like I said, put it in a cultural context. Mm-hmm. It goes beyond the photography. This is another one where people bust on me. Henri Cartier-Bresson. I don't know. Something like that. But he's a very famous photographer. And I love this picture because this is about capturing the moment and understanding.
This is a terrible picture. It's all blurry.
No, it's not.
It needs a white point. I'm joking about the sort of obsession that we can all have about the technical aspects of a photo. When this photo itself, it's hard to describe for those listening, but there's a stairwell that's not quite a spiral stairwell, but leads the eye from the bottom of the frame towards the center of the frame. And then right where the stairwell points, there's somebody on a bike going through a curved road that's leading across the frame, but it points right to that subject. And compositionally, it is literally a work of art.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. You could not have painted such a perfect arrangement. And you don't even know that much about the location of it. You can't see the person's face. It is about shape and texture and light.
Yeah.
And composition. And
so
it's
this sort
stunning.
of pulls you in. And one thing I love is that he found something extraordinary in the ordinary. I'm sure people went up and down these stairs every day and never thought to capture them. I'm sure so many photographers would look at the scene and never think to pull out their camera, but he saw something beautiful and he waited for something to go through the scene. I don't know the exact story, but I imagine that that's what he did, and it paid off. It's a beautiful picture.
And I love this shot because we have a scene like this near us, all of us and people listening.
Yeah.
You could go make this picture or something like it because
The
there
essence,
is something beautiful around you, some beautiful arrangement of people and things.
But you have to have the technical ability, the understanding of composition. You have to know the history of your art and put it in context with what's going on around you socially and globally. And then you have to be patient enough to see it and wait and have the confidence to also know goodness when you see it. So it's like, these are a lot of skills that come together to make a great photographer.
And then once you get the shot, you have to get it in front of people for them to be able to appreciate it. So you need some ability to say market it.
And if it's on the internet, if we put this on 500px,
I'd be curious to just put this picture up and just see how it did. I wouldn't want to take credit for somebody else's work, but it would get skimmed over right away. I promise this would get 1/10 the normal likes on Instagram.
Yeah. And that's kind of sad, isn't it? That's what I'm talking about. This podcast really hit me hard making it because I realized, like, it's kind of sad what's happening to photography.
It is changing drastically.
Yeah. I mean, it's also exciting. Don't get me wrong. I really like the technology. I think it's cool when people do amazing compositions and comp things together and do Photoshop effects. I think that's still art. But I think that maybe we're losing our appreciation for these simple moments that you can capture in a really artful way.
Yeah, it used to be people would put 5 or 10 years into making the perfect picture.
Yeah.
And nowadays, pictures, we put seconds of energy into them.
Yeah.
I wanted to back up here a little bit. I also wanted to bring up a good question. How important is wealth to making a great photographer?
I have to say it's discouraging, but in researching a lot of photographers, they start out kind of privileged.
Yeah, this seems to be a really common trend when we look up the most famous photographers.
Ansel Adams' family was very rich.
Yeah.
They were in in the business of like taking down trees or something in the lumber industry or something.
Yeah, they had a big business and that helped. His dad bought him cameras. They were able to travel around and take family vacations. If you're poor, that's not something you can do.
And Mary Ellen Mark, I mean, she went and got her bachelor's and then went back and got her master's and then traveled to Turkey. I mean, clearly she wasn't poor.
Right.
And then who was the photographer where his dad was so rich at the time his allowance was like $40,000 a month and he just was hanging out with the most famous people and making connections. A lot of them are very wealthy.
It is discouraging, and the photographers we've studied, none of them have had poverty in their own personal background. And I think that's a shame. I would love to find a way to eliminate that barrier. I do think it's dropping.
It's getting better because now people can, just use a phone or a simple camera.
Yeah, the next great photographers are using their smartphones right now. And far more people at lower income levels are able to have smartphones and other types of small cameras.
Or just starting with a cheap point and shoot.
Right.
It's a couple $100s now versus maybe thousands when those people were up and coming artists.
Though photography also requires some leisure time in the beginning because it doesn't initially make you money. And if you're out there, working 2 shifts a day, trying to feed your family, you're probably not going to have a lot of extra energy to take pictures. But I think that's true of any sort of art. So it is nice if we could find a way to
level the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, maybe support those people who really have talent.
So I loved this quote. You should look up Ken Van Sickle on YouTube because there's a great little interview with him that I pulled this from. And he's talking about what makes a great photographer. He says, if you were there when the Hindenburg caught on fire and you took a picture of it, that's a great photograph. But you're not a great photographer because you can't repeat that. What a great photographer does is they're consistently able to make something in a style that's personal to themselves. So he makes a really good point. You could be there and see something amazing happen. You have the opportunity to take a great photo, but being a great photographer is something very different than having a few great photos. And I think that's something to think about. You can think about that in context with your work. Look through your portfolio, get an idea of what your strong points are. What traits of these do you have? What could you learn? What could you stand to change about yourself that would help you become a great photographer? And I learned a lot about myself just reading about these people.
Yeah, it's something to ponder.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up. Who makes this sort of podcast possible?
Squarespace makes this episode possible. Thank you very much. If you'd like to get your own portfolio, put all of your great pictures in one place for people to see, you can go to squarespace.com/Tony and use the coupon code portfolio to get 10% off of your portfolio.
After your free trial, you can just try it out.
Yeah. You
no
can
need to
also
sweat it. You gotta throw the cash down. It's free at first.
Yeah, it's free for 14 days.
But yeah, they make it really easy. It makes our portfolios look great. Thank you, Squarespace. If you want more information about the podcast, you can go to stp.io/podcast. There you can see all our old podcasts. It's good for listening to or watching on YouTube.
And please tell us in the comments below, what do you think makes a great photographer? Who are your favorite photographers and why? What traits do you lack or do you desire to have? I'm curious to hear what you guys think. I think this episode is more subjective. There's no right answer, really.
Right.
I couldn't really boil it down into one answer, so I'd like to hear from them.
And who knows what the next generation of great photographers will need. It's a changing world. They might need totally different traits.
Because computer skills are pretty important now.
Yeah, technical skills really can be more important.
Yeah.
Thanks. Like, subscribe, etc. Sure.
Thank you.
Bye.